Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Ghost Recon Breakpoint takes place on the fictional archipelago of Aurora, which is under the ownership of Skell Technology, a company that specializes in, among other things, advanced killer drones. When contact is lost with the islands, your team of ghosts is sent to investigate, only to be shot down and cut off from the outside world. It turns out the island has been taken over by Sentinel, a private military company led by rogue former Ghost Walker. Cut off and alone, you need to survive against the odds and complete your original mission. Whichever way you look at Breakpoint, the best way to describe it is incoherent. Ubisoft Paris has taken the excellent core gameplay of the Ghost Recon franchise and then attempted to bolt a series of baffling mechanics to it in a misguided attempt to create a live service game without any thought put into how any of it fits together. The result is a confusing mess of redundant systems, which does its best to try to distract you from the only thing Breakpoint actually does well. It's shooting. When you're able to ignore everything else, it can be really satisfying planning out and executing a mission, stealthily breaking into an area, tagging enemies with the help of your drone, and silently taking them down on your way to an objective or out of a base. Every time I was despairing over some other part of the game, the feeling of successfully infiltrating an enemy base kept me playing just a little bit longer. The enemy AI being utterly brain dead doesn't help, however. If you're feeling particularly lazy during an infiltration, you could set up on a vantage point with a silence rifle and shoot literally everyone without them knowing where you are. Or make some noise and pick off everyone who comes to investigate. At one point, when I needed a boat, I simply opened fire, in plain sight, with a silent sniper rifle. No one clocked my location, despite the fact that I needed to reload before shooting the last bad guy. In open combat, they're even more thoroughly incompetent. If you're spotted, enemy tactics revolve around either charging your position, one at a time, or becoming so focused on swapping back and forth between two pieces of cover, they forget to shoot at you altogether. If this was the only noticeable issue, then Breakpoint would probably amount to a decent experience. But it's not. Far from it. In recreating Ghost Recon as a service, the developers have borrowed from many other Ubisoft games. Like the gear system, lifted from The Division, you'll spend a lot of your time finding new weapons and gear. All of it has levels, and you'll be constantly equipping new items to increase your gear score to take on tougher challenges. Except, that's not how Breakpoint works. Although it takes on the appearance of a looter shooter, this is still also a tactical shooter, meaning you can drop all enemies with a single headshot, or two if they're wearing a helmet, or a handful of body shots. So the gear score doesn't matter. At all. The only reason you'll want to swap your loadout around is to suit your playstyle. You won't need to agonize over ditching your underleveled SMG for something more level appropriate, because there's no such thing, no matter what the game tries to tell you. Which makes the idea of high-level fortresses, which supposedly require high-level gear, laughable. You can rock right up to a high-level challenge in Breakpoint, treat it like any other mission, and clear it out, regardless of your gear score. And once you've realised this, it makes Breakpoint's huge open world feel utterly empty. The space between missions is vast, requiring long travel times to get anywhere. And this space is littered with points of interest, faction missions, and a host of content that yields better gear. They're momentary distractions, nothing really worth stopping for, because the gear isn't worth it and the encounters are incredibly uninspired, all of which makes that 15-kilometer trek to the next waypoint feel like an eternity. Maybe if the game successfully sold me on the idea that I was ever in danger, I'd have felt more immersed in its world. Both the narrative and pre-release marketing try to hammer home the idea that you're alone and the wolves are hunting you. In practice, none of that is true. The game's hub is constantly filled with other players, and at no point was I ever fighting for survival while being hunted through the wilderness by any elite soldiers. Every now and again I needed to hide from a passing Azrael drone, but all that required was to lie down for a minute before going back to whatever I had been doing previously. Even the game's stab at survival mechanics is worthless. Resources are plentiful, eating and drinking is only done to activate temporary buffs, your bandages are infinite, and your health bar recharges. The story is littered with these types of contradictions too, filled with horrendous cliches, terrible dialogue, and stilted voice acting. John Bernthal aside, who is weirdly compelling despite the fact that his character and the story he's in makes no sense. Again, the hub makes any idea that Breakpoint is remotely interested in telling its story redundant. This is a cynical attempt to hammer Ghost Recon into a live service with all the recurrent user spending that entails. Only there isn't any motivation to spend money on high-level weapons and gear because again, your gear score is meaningless. Ordinarily, when I bounce off a game like I have done with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, I can usually at least see what the developer was trying to do. Here, though, I have no earthly idea. The skeleton of a satisfying game exists. That's evident in the fact that the core gameplay is still solid. But it's been submerged under the weight of all of the ill-conceived mechanics that have been half-heartedly bolted onto it. It honestly feels like no thought has gone into how to make a live service Ghost Recon. Like loot progression, all of the most profitable live services need a loot treadmill, so there's one in Breakpoint, despite the fact that the core gameplay hasn't been tweaked to accommodate it, resulting in a loot being thoroughly redundant. Which is what the entire game feels like. A cynical, redundant attempt to create a product designed around recurrent user spending, instead of a game designed for people to enjoy. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment, like, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got tons of awesome videos coming every week, including review impressions, indie game of the week, debate-driven top 5 lists, video essays, and our weekly podcast where we discuss games, gaming culture, and the games industry. We also stream 3 times a week at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. But most importantly, have a fantastic day.